So the first thing is, Radin here, to me, gave me the best definition I've seen of poverty in a long time. And I put that up there partly to reinforce what I think a lot of people in Wellington forget, is that the experts in solutions are the people with the problem, not the policy analysts and all those sorts of people in Wellington. And so poverty for me means deprivation of opportunity and the inability to live a safe and healthy life. This can be seen as unemployment, homelessness, financial hardship, inadequate access to health and education, and we've just heard food. You know, too often in this country, the experts are ignored. We've seen it in disability, we've seen it in the Canterbury earthquake recovery, we see it in poverty. So what I really want to introduce you to, if you haven't seen them already, are the global goals, the global agenda for sustainable development. And in terms of what Radin's definition is, goal 1 is poverty, but that really isn't that relevant to New Zealand, because that definition of poverty says $1.25 a day. The next one's hunger, the next one's health and well-being, and the next one's education, and the other one that's highly relevant to this is reduced inequalities. Okay, and what I'm going to leave a couple of resources with you. One is a bit of work by the Danish Human Rights Commission, which takes every one of those goals and the 168 indicators, targets that exist for each one of those goals, puts the human rights that are relevant to each one of those goals, and then analyses the indicators in terms of human rights, because this is a human rights agenda. Another thing I just brought along, this is the only thing I've found that any country's done. This is a Norwegian analysis of what this means for Norway, which I would suggest to you is very similar to how it would work for New Zealand. So this is what our Foreign Minister said less than 3 months ago in the General Assembly in New York. New Zealand welcomes the adoption of the SDGs, but we also know that this marks the beginning, not the end of the process. Ahead lies the serious challenge of attempting to meet these goals. If we are to succeed in a way in which the MDGs did not, we will need to learn from the significant lessons of the recent past. These lessons are about the hard work and hard decisions about choosing the right priorities and focusing on the practical outcomes. Above all, they are about strong partnerships that deliver positive, timely results. Now, I'm not sure when he said that he was talking about New Zealand, because a lot of the rest of the speech was about the Pacific Islands. But actually, New Zealand has promised to meet these. And we'll just go into that. The question is, will New Zealand keep its promise? In the General Assembly, immediately after the Prime Ministers and Popes and everybody else had said their great words, Malala Yousafzai stood up after they passed the resolution and said, will you keep your promises? That's the big question. They've got 15 years. And so we've got 2 big promises as far as I'm concerned. The first promise is that the state has promised to protect and promote the political, civil, economic, social and cultural human rights of everybody who lives here. That promise has been around for nearly 50 years. But now the state has promised to leave no one behind in implementing the 2030 Sustainable Agenda, to leave no one behind. And what's going to happen now, they're just in the process of agreeing what of the 200 indicators. The statistical commissions, or like Stats New Zealand, are working together globally to come up with what those indicators would be at a global level. Then each country needs to work out how to contextualise that at a national level, which will be quite different from the international level. And New Zealand and every other country has to disaggregate that data by Indigenous people, by different ethnicities, by sex, by disability, and any other areas that they collect data in. And we're actually quite good at doing that already. We don't do it perfectly, but we're probably better than most countries, certainly with Indigenous data. And then once you've got the data and you've established the gaps, your job is to, in 15 years, eliminate them. And we can, and going back to Radin's definition of poverty, you will find different gaps for different groups of people right through New Zealand, and under all the definitions that he had. So one of the most interesting things, now, you won't believe where this building came from, but I was at a conference in Montreux two weeks ago of about 30 people that the Swiss and British governments had got together to look at mega sporting events and human rights. So we had people like FIFA, the IOC, the Commonwealth Games Federation, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, all the big sponsors of sport, governments, trade unions, and the head of the Commonwealth Games Federation got up and used this house to explain what the Commonwealth Games are all about. It blew me away, but when he explained it, I get it, what he's doing. I mean, they ran the Glasgow Games around human rights. They ran it about embracing protest, about causes around GLBTI and other things, and they intend to do that at every Commonwealth Games. They see the Commonwealth Games as a movement for change, not a sports event. A movement for change over the 10 years it takes to organise it. So if you look at what we do at the Human Rights Commission, what Suzanne and people at Transparency International do, we all fit into that peace foundation. So it's conflict resolution, it's transparency and accountability of government, it's human rights promotion and protection of all human rights. And I just put SDG Goal 16 there. So SDG Goal 16 is a justice and peace goal. Specifically has stuff like governments will be transparent and accountable, stuff around the rule of law and all that sort of thing. And then, of course, the recognition and inclusion of marginalised groups. That is what human rights is at that peace-building level. And then in each of these pillars of economic, social and environmental rights, which are explained in detail in some of these areas, we've got to work out how we're going to implement them in the next 15 years. And there's I just want you to really understand there's no coherence at all in New Zealand about this. The Ministry of Health just published a draft 10-year strategy for comment. We commented on it comments closed last Friday. We said you haven't mentioned the human right to health. You haven't mentioned SDG Goal 3, which is about health and well-being. So if you look at, to me, that is how we could get policy coherence. If we could use the SDGs and use the Treasury's Higher Living Standards framework as a way of pulling all this together, if we could actually recognise the experts like Raiden and not the policy people. The Treasury's policy people are actually doing really good work now. They're going out to the experts. They're going out into the field and asking outside the policy bubble. And I saw a bit of data analysis done by one of the government people the other day that literally showed that it was just of emails of people, literally showed a sort of echo chamber effect in Wellington where people just talk to each other and not to the people. And we've got to stop that. So that really is all I wanted to talk about today. But just to say that there is hope that people are doing it right, and I talked about this last year, and I'll leave this here too. The Canterbury District Health Board led the redesign of the Canterbury health system with over 3,800 NGOs and businesses and government agencies, and they have been phenomenally successful. You know, there have been times when I think the centre has tried to expel the Canterbury District Health Board as if they were some sort of virus. But now that governments like the governments of Britain and China are looking at this model as a way to run their health services, the rest of New Zealand's standing up and looking at it. And then the other thing, I know that you've got the Productivity Commission coming, and just in their report, this is really similar to what we saw from the Auckland City Mission. That's their report about all the social services that sit around in the $24 billion that the government spends every year on trying to solve these problems. And that report's pretty scary too, because it sort of says, actually, we're still not doing the right thing. For all the money that we're spending, we're not actually getting the answers to solve the problems that Raiden has actually well defined, I think. So that systems approach needs to come in if we're going to solve this problem. And it's not sort of, you know, in the old days of human rights, you could cynically say everyone would sit around the corner holding hands and singing Kumbaya. You know, that's not going to happen anymore. This is going to be driven by data, right? So by data and by science. And the government's made some pretty big promises that need to be delivered by 2030, and it includes poverty in New Zealand. So that's all I have today. Thank you.